thanks to everybody who's got me here and got us all here, and thanks to all the great presentations today. Hopefully we'll be able to speak to some of them after this. Michelle gave me the option to talk about whatever I want to talk about, which is it's just not a good thing to say to Paul O'Neill because I'm quite an indecisive person. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that on, so it's a little bit. It's a little bit lacking in, it's not lacking in focus. It's going to be quite focused, but it's a little bit lacking in structure. But I'm working on a book at the moment. It's called Flip-Flopping Institutional Paradigms, working title only. It comes out of quite a long period of work, and I've been spending a lot of time looking back at work that I've been doing over the last 30 years, in particular work on the question of the institution. So thinking about what constitutes the institution, why are they not working for us within the cultural sector? Why are they closing? Why are art institutions more specifically closing every day? What is it that we already know that we could be doing in order to transform the institutions that we have currently? And it strikes me that the question of institution, or the problem of institution, is the nature of the invitation. That the nature of the invitation is always coming from above, regardless of how we think about the ethics of the invitation, or regardless of how we think of the quality of the invitation, or questions of good practice and so on. And we've had 30 years of reimagining, rethinking histories of institutional critique, and I think we've arrived at a moment where it's gone through maybe at least 3 or 4 phases of institutional critique, which is focusing on being outside the institution and breaking them down, early 20th century, to second phase, institutional critique. We need to get inside those institutions and change them from within. Then the third phase being more in line with, there is no difference between inside and outside. And there's kind of leftovers of that now. And then fourthly, I think the question of governance. So institutional governance needs to be taken on and challenged by artists and by cultural workers and activists and so on. And I think then that for me, again, the question of governance within the institution is kind of, in a way, somehow insufficient. So I think that where I'm trying to argue for now is a question of institution that really looks at the relationship between institutions. So how can we think about the relationship between institutions at the level of the invitation? So how can we think about the invitation that's not coming from above? How can we also imagine ways in which the nature of the invitation is not defined by the ethics of the institution that is doing the invitation, even though they may all already be doing particularly good work. So this is the kind of huge question that I'm tackling at the moment, and of course I'm doing this in a very small way with running a small institution in Helsinki called Publics, and we have a para-hosting program where we it's like a cooperative approach through which we invite or other organizations and activists and groups and individuals invite themselves into our program, and we para-host them, and we help or we support or find ways for them to do something that they couldn't do without the space, without the flexibility in time and space, and without some sort of institutional support, whether that be administrative, spatial knowledge, and so on. But I'm not going to talk about what we've been doing with para-hosting, but I'm really and I can also take questions to that later on. But I'm really thinking about in much bigger terms at the moment of proposing para-hosting as like a methodology, as a kind of model of institutional support for self-organization and collective action, whilst resisting any kind of co-option of the guests. Yeah, difficult task, of course. But to posit the notion of escape as a kind of key transformative potentiality for large institutions as well as smaller institutions and self-organized initiatives, but to shift their own institutional and curatorial practices of hospitality as they tend to reproduce the kind of host and guest invitation. So what are the other models that we could be thinking about other than hosting and guesting each other, and hospitality and looking after each other and so on? And of course, there's extraordinarily brilliant work being done already within the field of arts at that level, and I'm not disowning that, because I'm also kind of accountable to some of these projects and practices around hospitality. But also, how can we account for what happens beyond extant power structures? So rather than thinking about power as something that could be analysed, just already recognising that we have some agency, that we have some ability to transform and to change, and also to somehow call for a switching out, or kind of like a flip-flopping of existing paradigms of this like upside down, turning things upside down, inside out, in terms of existing agential paradigms of institutional critique. So that's 6 minutes. I'm going to very hard to try and keep to time. But I want to just this is like a word of warning from this book that I just finished on collective work and collaborative work, and define some sort of distinctions between collaboration and collective practices. But in all cases, and there's brilliant work and brilliant essays across the world in this book, but there's always some sort of obstacle, and the obstacle that seems to be at the crux of the potentiality of real transformation is the question of labour and precarity of labour, and what kind of work we do or we think we do, and what kind of work they do or they don't do. And I'm not so interested in creating this polarity, but I think it's interesting to acknowledge that if I define this definition of work by Maria Barrios, Pip Day, and Sofia Elsquago, and if you recognize this form of work, you will be part of the we as opposed to the they, I imagine. And this is kind of a tendency to the tendency within this kind of invitation from the big institution. Will you come and curate my show here, or will you come and do a residency here, or will you come and be an artist in residency, or will you come and do an exhibition, or will you write an essay for me? All of these things are really important, and they're mechanisms, or they're tools, or they're methods within a larger methodology of a way in which we get to make public what we do. But I'm more interested in not thinking about those kind of invitations. I'm more interested in thinking about this kind of it always results in this kind of tendency to flatten out the complexities of power, citation, and acknowledgement under what becomes reductive notions of collaboration, and in a way that blur and hierarchise diverse subjectivities and forms of labour. And in the face of the precarity of cultural labour, there's a kind of a normalising notions of value production. The curator has kind of certain control and power, and the artists might also, because they have many years of autonomy and so on, whereas people that might not be coming from the Eurocentric parts of the world or Western parts of the world have less or different forms of labour that we could also be learning from, for example. But in their account of labour, this is where you might find yourself or not, particularly on the way. Work. Scene. Maintenance and cleaning, drinking coffee or beer with artists, attend openings and inaugurations, go to parties, organise parties and fundraising activities, find services, money and donate materials, prepare budgets and timetables, complete accountability reports, design strategic plans, answer the phone, open and close the door, turn the lights on and off, turn the exhibition's audiovisual equipment on and off, buy books for the library and keep them organised, write a lot of emails, produce video conferences, prepare reports for the administrative board, meet the administrative board, attend foundations, events and meetings, develop and sustain relations with foundations, personnel and donors, organise birthday lunches, and for collaborations, recharge the rechargeable batteries, coordinate the exhibitions, install and deinstall, offer guided tours, talks about the organisation, change the defect light bulbs, fix the microwave, set up the space for events, place the chairs, take out the tables, open and close the windows, water the plants, buy food for the workshops, coffee breaks. Brews tons of coffee, cooks, buy materials for the workshops, recruit participants for the workshops, confirm their attendance, scan documents, prepare FedEx and DHL shipments, go to the post office, take inventories of equipment and furnishings, keep and coordinate guests' pickups from the airports, turn the alarm on and off, be the emergency contact for the alarm monitoring company, make copies of and monitor the keys to the space, curate exhibitions, write art books, buy materials for artists to curators, pieces, read applications for open calls, produce and share social media, and on and on and on and on. So it's a very, very long, much longer list. But it seems to me that regardless of the great kind of work of resisting, these kind of like cultural or these kind of like institutional hierarchies when entering into a space as a self-organization or as a less appreciated self-organization or interesting collective action, that this work gets in the way of changing the very relationship between the inviter and the invitee, or the guest and the host. So what I'm proposing in this book is that we need to think again about the relationship between hosting and guesting, but proposing like para-hosting not as a solution, but as a kind of like a playful approach to kind of divert the way things are. And this would also apply to practice of hospitality and taking care within institutional context while resisting the kind of perception of unique individual authorship or unique curatorship or authority as coming from within the institution, and the potential of being both para-hosts and para-guests as part of the institutional paradigm shift. I mean, many people have done this over the years, artists, curators, activists, and so on, you know, shifting the relationship between, you know, the pedagogue and the teacher, for example, the teacher and the student and the teacher. But also, you know, there are many other ways in which this has been facilitated in kind of versions of like play, for example. But what I'm proposing is like the para-hosting would be a way of rethinking this nature of the hospitality itself, which can be understood as a kind of curatorial methodology in need of change, where there's a kind of a willingness to do so, but also recognizing that there are certain sacrifices which need to be made. And in relying a little bit on the work of Mary Jane Douglas, she wrote that in order for us to think institutionally differently, we have to think about what are the sacrifices that we're prepared to make in order for those institutional thinking within ourselves to be transformed. And as you can see, there's like a huge wealth of knowledge and a huge kind of lexicon of terms that we can draw upon. There's like, you know, 50, 60 years of activist, curatorial and discursive work which has been happening within and moving across different kind of institutional paradigms and structures and scales. So what I'm proposing is that we learn from these, and that we bring this toolbox with us to kind of larger infrastructural alignments, and to argue our case. So what if this was exactly the question of like where we were to relocate the question of escape, of movement and transformation at the level of the institution and not at the level of the experience, or not at the level of, oh, that's a really good collaboration, that's a really bad collaboration, but what if we were really to think about it at the level of a structural, the structure of the invitation itself and the structure of the power dynamic between different institutional alignments. So what if, for example, the small-scale precarious organization became the large, huge, and heavily supported organization? Or what if, as Nina Montman put it, that small-scale organizations not only get to lead the way when it comes to attempts to decentering the infrastructures and the programming, but by also examining institutional critique from within their own structures. But that they do it on another level altogether. I mean, small-scale organizations get to do it on another level altogether. But this does not mean that one institutional paradigm replaces another institutional paradigm. It means that a process has to be set in place in order for this to happen, but not a complete like switching out from one for another, where of course the dynamics of power will start to return in the kind of same ways they have always done, and as we can see what's happening now across the world. But what if power hosting itself was adopted by more larger or more stable institutions as a mechanism of self-transformation and parasitic resistance? What if the ethos and values and informal infrastructures of small-scale institutions are power-hosted by big institutions with less restricted budgets, without coercion or co-option, and plans for their collection, for example, or their self-interest of their board or their financiers? What if short-termism is now like durational, slow programming, careful with like longer form, longer term embeddedness? What if outside practices, so-called outside practices, become part of the inside, but with the terms set by them, their inside? What if existing paradigms, boundaries and orders and infrastructural funding was redistributed to zero budget self-organizations, deep research, in-depth publicness? What if roles are rearranged across scales and positions of access? What if those who currently have power agree to be power hosts and power guests by switching out with those who have none? What if escape was a space of mobilization, not a space of like individual transformation or a subjective experience? What if escape was this space for mobilizing with museum directors and state funders and private fund givers and full-time professors of art retraining to become carers or cooks, and self-organized initiatives and collective action-based organizations take over the museum for a while with minimal administration? Meanwhile, directors or fund givers or state funders or politicians get to spend time at home, not traveling and not eating out and or retraining or detraining. What if they get to write and they get to look more at art and the world? Protests in the streets, looking after those in need, hanging out in libraries, decorating artist studios for them, cleaning kitchens, reading in coffee shops, helping small organizations to survive, helping them to fundraise, whilst their institutions are led by the small-scale organizations. What if museum directors and fund givers find time to chat in spaces of gathering, being outdoors in the sunshine and waiting for the sunset with a friend in tow? What if those institutional curators or directors then get to be the power guests of smaller, now more stable and now larger art institutions to work together through some common concerns about what is needed, missing, forgotten, overlooked, in need of decentering, decolonizing, reorientating in terms of power and accessibility? Like returning from a dreamlike state, this imaginative space that I'm proposing being somewhere outside our comfort zone, there is a kind of remoteness to this proposition of escape, but that makes it exactly the reason why we can, therefore, escape in an act of release or liberation from something or someone or somewhere, from this place and this time, from fixed roles, responsibilities, and expectations. However, could it be for longer than just a moment? We will always be accompanied by some kind of wish to be transformed, but can we escape from ourselves? you and I, us and our predeterminedness, we can become abstracted, if you like. We can get out of it, or we can get off our heads, out of the game, but not out of our heads or out of ourselves. Escape is always a site of returning, a coming back, a coming down, no matter how immersive the experience of getting lost. The idea of escape, 1 minute, the idea of escape through para-hosting and proposing must be more than just a momentary two-way change in the power dynamic where one structure replaces or supersedes another taking place. Instead, through the continuous kind of duality of negotiation, of compromise and sacrifice, of getting lost whilst getting things done, para-hosting on a larger scale offers more than momentary shifts of reflective self-critique for institutional practice. It also amplifies the need for deeper structural collaborations and a flip-flopping the unstable dynamics of small-scale operations with the internal logic of operations, and support mechanisms of larger scale, seemingly more stable institutions included in the expansive intermingling of authorship and of art and of activism and curatorial forms of cultural production. So this idea of it would thus extend the possibility and reach of the so-called curatorial beyond the conventions or conventional understanding of autonomy, or individualized forms of liberation or enlightenment of the self or the institution, rather than seeing this realignment of hierarchies as potential economic instability, as a failure of imagination of the larger institution, for example. It could be seen as part of an evolution of, and maybe a response towards, new forms of social models of co-production, as much as a recognition of a need for structural transformation of the conditions of cultural practice, with the blurring of fixed subject identities as much as creating more hybrid forms of artistic production, social change, and so on. So in the face of continued failure of the left to effectively resist advanced neoliberal capitalism and increasingly overt forms of oppression around sexuality, gender, race, ethnicity, the working class, the working poor, virulent neo-fascism, expanding right-wing authoritarianism, the art institution is an increasingly vulnerable organism, as we have seen across the world in recent years. So can the art institution build upon its wealth of curatorial knowledge that they have, that we have, and practices of the last 3 decades in creating new forms of solidarity and learning from what has been done? And in doing so, can institutions suggest alternative futures by extending these solidarities, by initiating and para-hosting reciprocity itself, where we para-host reciprocity? We don't think of it as like a host and a guest, but we look after, we para-host the space of reciprocity, of giving and taking itself, in turn helping support more cooperative forms of resistance. So where else can art institutions can build dialogical relationships to reimagine legacies of long-term established paradigms of control for our difficult historical present? Through switching out and an institutional flip-flopping, or turning over or turning inside out, through displacement and self-negation, our cultivated dissensus, stable institutions are not being asked to tear down their walls altogether. Crucially, they can take steps themselves to reimagine their own walls, their own resources and agentful power structures by giving them and their position of greater stability, though nothing's ever stable, of course, over to those who need them most. As they para-host, what, who, and where is encountered upon and beyond them may form a small gesture towards a culture of para-hosting in the hope of a more equitable and stable reality. Thank you.